All right, welcome, psychology students. Just a couple reminders. If you're here, it's because you chose to be here. So remember that we have a very special guest speaker, and we're going to show him how fabulous we are at Oakton High School. So that means, put your phones away, please. If you want to be on your phone, go to your 7th period class. Alright? So just please give him your undivided attention. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who this is in a second, but he's come a long way to talk to you all and put a lot of time and effort into this presentation. Alright, I like it. We're doing well. If you need to use the restroom, anything like that, just kind of exit out the back so it's not super distracting. All right, so we have Sam Gillman here from Montreal. He works in a sleep lab at Concordia University. He came and talked to psych students last year, and it was one of the highlights of the year, and we are super lucky to have him here in person with us this time. Because that's better than Zoom, right, you guys? Do you miss Google Meets? Or like, we kind of do, because we were sleeping the whole time. But all right, so he's going to talk to you all about sleep and a couple other cool things, some of which you haven't learned yet, some of which you have, and it's going to be a little interactive. So I hope you all are ready for an amazing little more than an hour. Without further ado, this is Sam.
Is this too loud? Is this not loud enough?
It's good.
It's good, thank you. I see how it
Perfect.
comes up. Okay. So obviously my name is Sam. I study sleep science. I'm here to talk to you guys about sleep science. You can see I'm currently in my master's, and I will actually talk about that and slides on this. And if you don't know, I'm Greg O'Brien's cousin. She's right here. Everybody look. Okay. She said it was okay to pick on her. Okay. Let's begin. So, first and foremost, I want you guys to know stuff. That's why I'm here. I'm not here to just talk at you mindlessly, and you guys just sort of, not pay attention. So, if you guys have any questions, if you guys are curious about something, please ask them. I want you guys to know stuff. And if there are no dumb questions, I have told my students this so many times, way too many times. They're really tired of me saying this. There are no dumb questions. I would rather you guys know something than not know something. So just go ahead and ask it. It's only a dumb question if you've asked it like 5 times, then that's a dumb question, you're not paying attention. Alright, so just a little bit about myself. Let me just talk about myself first. First thing, so I'm from a small town outside of Boston named Holliston. If any of you know it, good for you. I did my undergrad at the University of Toronto in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. If you guys don't know what that is, there's a map. Where here I studied neuroscience, psychology, and physiology. And I also worked in various labs for about a net of 2 years, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And I'm currently in my Master's of Science at the Sleep, Cognition, and Neuroimaging Lab at Concordia University, a school not so many people know about, in Montreal, Canada. I'm sure you guys know Montreal. And here I am researching sleep, memory, and aging, which I'll talk about on the following slide. So, the research projects I did work on during my undergrad, I worked on one project looking at novel stroke treatments, which proved to be pretty successful at Boston University. Then I worked with learning in mice, specifically eye blink conditioning. You guys know conditioning? Yeah, a little bit. So Pavlov's dogs, ring a bell, feed the dogs, they salivate, ring a bell, keep doing that, and then all of a sudden you just ring the bell and the dogs start salivating. For this, I essentially we played a tone with mice and puffed some air in their eye, and they blinked. And we do that like 100 times, and then we just play the tone, and the mice will blink without the puff of air. And I did this while turning some parts of the brain on and some parts of the brain off, and I got to see which parts of the brain were necessary for this to happen and learned for this to happen, which were not. And during that time, I also got to work on a novel treatment for narcolepsy, also nice. And this, narcolepsy, is not very fun. I'm going to save a lot of time and not go into the nitty-gritty details of narcolepsy, but it is a hypersomnolence disorder involved with lots of uncontrolled bouts of sleep, so you can fall asleep whenever, excessive daytime sleepiness, and hallucinations. Not fun. Wouldn't recommend it. What I'm currently doing, I am looking at how different brain waves interact with each other during sleep in relation to memory. What does that mean? So essentially, if the brain has electrical activity in the brain, it can go a bunch of different ways, and I'll show you in a different slide. But essentially, doing different parts of the brain are talking to each other all the time, especially during sleep. And we think this is a transfer of information across the brain, which is involved with memory. So how their interactions change with age is something I'm interested in doing because it does it change with age? I want to find out. And does this change with age and the brain activity? Does that relate to a natural age-related decline in memory? Because as you all may already know, as you get older, your memory gets worse. Why? We don't know. How do I do this? I'm going to talk about all this next stuff on the next following slides. I use neuropsychological evaluations. I use this thing called polysomnography and electroencephalography. I hope you guys know what electroencephalography is, EEG, and memory tasks. So, a neuropsychological evaluation, let's pick that apart. Neuro, which is brain, psych, obviously with psychology, so we're evaluating the neuropsychology, psychology in one's brain. And how I do this, the first thing I literally do is just ask them straight up to their face, how is your sleep? How is your well-being? Do you sleep well? Do you have insomnia? What's your habits and consumption like? Followed by that, we want to look at what memory is like, and I use what's called the mini mental state examination, the MMSE, and the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, which is called the MOCA. Very exciting. And then followed by that, we have what's called self-report questionnaires, standardized self-report questionnaires, very, very self-explanatory, very creative name. They literally have participants just fill out a questionnaire by themselves. They fill it out themselves. And it's very standardized, meaning that the questionnaire is very generalizable, meaning different people can take the same questionnaire, and then in the end, you're going to get some sort of output number that can be compared to each other. So I have 6 for sleep, 2 for anxiety and depression, and 1 for handedness, so the right-handed and left-handed. And I'm just going to show what the MOCA looks like, because that actually looks cool. So this is the MOCA. This gives us a general idea of how someone's brain is working, what their cognition is doing. The very first task, you literally draw a line from 1 to A to 2, 2 to B, and so forth. From a number to a letter in ascending order, you literally draw a cube right below it. You're going to be shown a bunch of letters. You're going to be told a bunch of letters. You have to slap a table when you hear the letter A. You want to know if someone's paying attention. Let's give us a general idea of what the brain is like. Because from my study, we're looking for healthy, good sleepers who can actually do memory tasks at night. And this will give us an idea if they can actually do it. This is polysomnography, very excited. Just feel the energy in the room. Polysomnography, what is that? So let's pick this word apart. We have poly, which means many. Somno, which means sleep, meaning graph. Graph, which means measure. So this measures many aspects of sleep. What specifically? So this involves electrodes, which are these little tiny metal discs that pick up electrical activity. And we put it on the brain, like on the scalp. On the scalp, it'll pick up brain activity. In the image in the middle, you see C3, C4, F3, and 4, reference 01, 02. Those are all electrode placements on someone's scalp to look at what their brain is doing. And we have electrodes on the brain. We have ones for the eyes. We don't know what the eyes are doing. If someone is asleep, their eyes aren't really moving unless they're in REM sleep, which we'll talk about on the following slide. We want to have ones for the legs. Because I don't know if you guys know what restless leg syndrome is. Literally, your legs are restless at night, you're just moving your legs around, and that actually will wake you up. And we also have ones for the chin and for the heart. For the chin, essentially, if you have good posture, you're awake, your spine is active. If you actually have muscle activity in the chin, that means you're awake. You'll have no chin activity if you're asleep, very horizontal, et cetera, et cetera. We also have, the chest sensors. We want to know if someone is breathing or not. If someone is not breathing, that's bad. So we have the abdominal sensor, the thoracic sensor, 2 nose thingies. I'm not going to go into the name of the nose thingies because that's going to be kind of complicated to explain. But essentially, if someone has stopped breathing, like if they have sleep apnea, I'm sure you guys have all heard of sleep apnea, it literally means you stop breathing while you sleep. It's not fun. You actually don't know what's happening. So when this does happen, you do stop breathing, no oxygen is coming into your lungs, and your blood oxygenation goes down, and your sleep quality gets worse. If this happens to you, if you stop breathing while you're awake, I'm sure you guys can imagine how unpleasant that may be, but you're asleep when this happens. And this is why we have the finger wrap for blood oxygenation, because if blood oxygenation goes down, it's not good. You're actually going to wake up gasping for air. It's not pleasant. And the mic for snoring, if you're snoring, we have a very expensive microphone. We can see that. Does that make sense to everyone? Any questions about that?
Can you put it, you just shake your head?
No. That's a good question. If we had to shave your head, we would have 0 participants. No one would want to shave their head. Actually, a shaved head is worse because everyone sweats while you're asleep. You say, oh, I sweat while I'm asleep. Well, that's not true. So with the electrodes, we actually have to put concrete, literally put conductive concrete and paste it onto your head with a little metal disc. And at night, when you sweat, if there's no hair, there's no hair to soak up the sweat. So the concrete soaks up the sweat and they fall off. And that means I, or one of my students, or someone has to go into the room, wake up the person. Oh yeah, they sleep in this, by the way. So people actually fall asleep with this. If you wake up in the room, wake them up. You have to scrape their head, so put more people on, paste it on their head. Leave the room, go back into the room with the computer, looking at the brain waves, making sure it's working. Go back in the room, tell them sorry, go back to bed, and you close the door. It's really nice. Yes. No, only because for my study, you can, but for my study, we're looking for good sleepers. So if they take a sleep medicine, that means they're not a good sleeper. Yes?
Never mind.
No. Yes?
How do you get participants for this?
Sorry?
Like, how do you get people to participate?
How do you get people? Many ways. Some people actually find our website and will email us directly. Lucky for us. Otherwise, we get pools of participants from a local hospital, or we'll put them at local gyms and training facilities, and we'll get participants that way.
Is it voluntary?
It is purely voluntary, yeah. You do get paid though if you finish it. Yes.
Are high schools allowed to do it?
If you're, for my study, as long as you're 18, yes. If you guys are in Montreal and you're 18, you want to have to do a sleep study. Yes, all the way in the back.
How much are they getting paid?
If you finish my study, you get paid $150. 150 Canadian dollars, so it's not out of the money.
1,000?
Sorry?
Never mind.
Okay. All right, okay. Moving on. Electroencephalography, EEG. You guys know what that is? Yeah. So electrodes, pick this word apart. Electrode, electricity, encephalo, outer part of the brain is the cortex, and then graph. So it's a measured electroactivity in the brain. For this, I want to see more brain activity. So you guys can see in the middle one, there's way more than C3, C4. There's way more stuff in the brain, so you can get more information from the brain. There's less equipment on body classes. There's more electricity. So we want to know what the eyes are doing, what the chin is doing, what the heart is doing. We want to know how the blood is doing. This is a little different. So this is the purpose of this is to get more data on the brain. And by the time the participant does this one, while they sleep in this again, by the time they do this, we know that they do not have a sleep disorder because they did the polysomnography. Okay, in the memory task, my memory task, this is called the word pair association task. It is very self-explanatory. The task is to literally associate 2 pairs of words. So we're shown, for example, cup and sand, and the participant's job is to imagine a scene combining the 2 objects. So a cup filled with sand. And they're shown this 40 times, 40 40 different pairs of words twice before going to bed. And then right after that, they're shown one word from each pair, and their job is to sort of remember which word is with that, which word is part of that pair. Then they're allowed to sleep. And then in the morning, they do that again, but they're just shown the one word from each pair. So we have an immediate recall of the words. They sleep, and then there's a delayed recall, delayed for by like 8 or 10 hours recall. And you want to compare the two. I want to see how they're different as a result of sleep. Does that make sense? I'm going to take silence as yes. So if I just say no, I'm going to go for no. Okay. All right, so that's my little personal introduction. That's kind of what I do. I'm going to be touching upon some more of the stuff later in this, but the sleep science portion is going to take out the bulk of this. Okay. This is my sleep part. All right. What is sleep? Here are our learning objectives. What is sleep? We're going to answer that, or attempt to. Then we're going to play a little game. We're going to figure out if this person is asleep or awake. Then we have, we're going to answer why sleep is important. It is important, FYI, do something early. We're going to figure out how do we find out the what and the why of sleep. We're going to answer the age-old question, do jellyfish sleep? You guys know something's been burning in their mind for the past 10 years. And I think the last one, can we sleep whenever and however much we want? Maybe. For now, where is sleep? All right, what is sleep? This is where I don't want to pick on people, but I want to hear from you guys. What is sleep? Any brave soul? Yes. Yes.
Sleep, I guess, sleep is where you...
You're going to have to yell, I can't hear you.
It's like when you regularly fall out of consciousness, I guess.
Okay, I like that one. Yes.
Probably the most relaxing 8 hours of my life.
That is actually a pretty good answer, yeah. Yep.
It's like when your brain kind of like shuts off and your subconscious is kind of at work.
Right, shuts off, that's a good one. Any other? Yes, you?
It's recharging.
Recharges, that's also a good one. Yes. Definitely, you also want to hear you. Use your one, yeah.
When you lose consciousness or you're getting unconscious and your brain kind of goes through and processes information throughout the day.
Okay, I like that one too. So, and some we have very relaxing, occurs very predictably. Yes, this will be our last one for the what is sleep.
Growth? When you grow the most?
Growth?
Yeah, is that?
Yes, growth does happen with that, yeah. So growth, very restorative, unconsciousness, it's predictable. I like all these. All right, so we're going to answer this. So sleep, some of the first sleep scientists tried to figure out, I feel, how do we learn more about sleep? That means to learn more, we need to know how to measure it. So in order to measure sleep, we have to figure out how we define it. You can't really measure something that isn't defined. So they came up with 7 different definitions. 4 are shown here. I'm going to show you the next 3. So the first one is typical posture. This is species specific. As in humans, we like to be very horizontal. Where in a bed, which is our location, because you see some of these animals, a leopard, can sleep in a tree. I don't know if you guys have not slept in a tree. It doesn't look very comfortable. It has what's called behavioral quiescence. And quiescence means a dampening of. So a dampening behavior. If you're asleep, you're probably not going for a jog or studying for an exam. Your behavior has been dampened. You're not really moving. You're not like paralyzed, you just don't move. There's total dampening of it. The next one is rapidly and spontaneously reversible. So if you're awake and someone pokes you on the shoulder, that's going to get your attention with like 1 or 2 pokes. If you're asleep, then you're going to need like, 50 pokes on the shoulder, and then you're wake up and like, oh, go away, please. And then you might fall back asleep immediately after. So it is, that means you woke up rapidly and spontaneously, and then fall back asleep rapidly and spontaneously. So speaking of pokes, we have an elevated awakening threshold, or an elevated attention threshold. So to get your attention right now, one poke is right here. So one poke is like all the way down here. 50 pokes is like all the way up here. The threshold is going to raise. And sleep, it has what's called the circadian rhythm. You guys have all heard of circadian rhythms. So sleep has a predictable 24-hour cycle. And it is what's called homeostatically regulated. Meaning that if you, let's say for example, don't sleep at all tonight, don't recommend, you're going to sleep either more the following night, or your sleep will become deeper the following night, or both. Alright. So for the scientists, when they're trying to figure out what sleep is, that was kind of difficult to actually define it. So they wanted to figure out what sleep is not. And sleep is not unconsciousness. Here's a Venn diagram, something you guys have all seen before. So the very first thing, so for unconsciousness, imagine Reagan comes and hits me in the head with a wrench. And I'm out cold on the floor, unconscious. So we're going to compare it like that. Please don't hit me in the head with a wrench. So there is a typical posture. For sleep is going to get this one. Because if I get hit in the head with a wrench and I'm out cold, unconscious, you can just pick me up and hold me up, I can be vertical to hold me up. If you're asleep and someone does that to you, you're going to wake up pretty much immediately. So unconsciousness can have any posture. Location. I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty sure me getting hit in the head with a wrench isn't really location specific. As in, I don't really think it's more likely that I would be hit in the head with a wrench and become unconscious when I'm in bed. So I'm gonna give that one to sleep. And behavioral quiescence, the dampening of behavior. I think they both kind of have that one, so we're gonna give it to that one. And we have rapidly and spontaneously reversible. This is something that sleep has. If you hit me on the head and I become unconscious, you might be able to not wake me up for the next 24 hours, which would be bad. So it doesn't matter how many pokes you give me, I might not rapidly and spontaneously reverse whatever state I'm in. And then an elevated awakening threshold, they both have that. I think this is the biggest difference. I don't know if you guys have seen like in movies where protagonists, it's like karate chop, like on the shoulders, they go, ah! And then the next cut scene is them, someone gets a bucket of water and throws it in their face and they splash and they wake up. I don't know if you really understood that. So that happens to you, you actually might not wake up. Or you might, but I feel like the threshold for this is going to be much higher because you might not wake up. More than that later. Exhibits a circadian rhythm. I don't think there is a predictable interval on a 24-hour clock as to when I'll get hit in the head. So, I know. So, we're going to give that one to sleep. And then the last one, we have homeostatically regulated. So, I don't know about you guys, but I think if I get hit in the head more today, I'll get hit in the head less tomorrow, or vice versa. So, I really hope it's not the case. So, if you don't hit me in the head today, and I get hit more in the head tomorrow, I'll let you guys know. We're going to give that one to sleep. So, based on the definitions we have of sleep, it sort of looks like that sleep is different than unconsciousness. So the point of me doing this is to show you guys that sleep isn't necessarily unconsciousness, it is a different state of consciousness. Alright, so continuing on the theme of what sleep is not. Sleep is not wakefulness. If you're awake, you're not asleep. So wakefulness generally has two different types. We have active wake, which is what I'm currently doing, walking around, sweating profusely. And quiet wake is when you're in bed, trying to fall. Let's say you go to bed, you're done staring at your phone. Not all of you have done it, I do it myself. And you turn your phone off, turn the lights off, and then you go to bed, you close your eyes, and you're just sort of lying there, but you're still awake. That's quiet wakefulness. You're not exactly active walking around like this, but you're very relaxed, you're not doing much. And the other half is what's called micro-awakenings, which are very brief bouts of awake, brain activity, interspaced by sleep brain activity. And have to be at least 10 seconds, less than 10 seconds. And these are, they're very typical, they're very natural, and they're often not remembered. Hopefully, yes. This is a little different than that. So this just happens frequently in everyone, we just don't know or remember. Sleepwalking and sleep talking is typically, this is a good, I can answer this. So sleepwalking and sleep talking, when they occur in people, it's typically as a result of anxiety. There's some sort of anxious response. We don't know why it happens. like I said, sleep is not unconscious. They're moving around, right? So since sleep is not unconsciousness, it's a state of consciousness. If you're anxious while awake and then go to bed, you're going to have anxious sleep. You're going to have your stress while awake, and you go to bed, you're going to have stress sleep. So a symptom of stressed sleep, for example, could be sleepwalking or sleep talking. All right, so brain activity, yay, here's some lines. We have gamma, beta, alpha, and theta. Gamma, as you can see, the blue descriptors right below them are quite general, not like definitive. So typically the really high frequencies, gamma, you keep going down, go to delta. So the more awake you are, typically the faster the frequency is, which is gamma. Gamma is the fastest. Then you have beta, alpha, and theta. Active wake has a lot of gamma, a lot of alpha, a lot of theta. And then you have quiet wake, which is a lot of theta and a lot of alpha. That's mostly theta. And I'm going to show you guys I'm actually going to show you guys a real EEG from one of our real participants, just to sort of calm your guys' brains. Let me play this movie. This is actually a real EEG. If you're colorblind, I apologize, especially if you're green colorblindness, guys. The very bottom line is really thick. Very bottom line is really thick. This is the chin activity. So this activity is if someone's really awake, the posture is good. And the top two lines are green. For colorblind, just the top two lines. Those are the eyes. That's the eye activity. And everything else is brain activity, other than the line that's right above the chin, so the second to the bottom. That's the ECG, or the heart activity. So this person is very much awake. Next, now, finally, I have talked about what sleep is not. Let's talk about sleep. So this is non-REM sleep. Non-REM sleep they called it that. The scientists are very creative. They called it non-REM, non-rapid eye movement sleep, because your eyes are not moving rapidly. Quite literal, and we think that was scientists. So we have generally 3 or 4 different stages, depending on the definition you use. And most of the research is focused on this stage of sleep over the past 2 decades. I don't know why, they just did it. So we have non-REM 1, which is called N1, which has a lot of alpha and a lot of theta. And this is a light stage of sleep, and it's often argued to not even be sleep. It's often argued to be a transition from being asleep to being awake. And if you've ever, just some of you guys have seen this, if you see someone sitting like very comfortable, like armbar chair or whatever, and someone's bobbing their head like this. This is the transition. Someone is literally going from awake to N1, so awake, N1, awake, N1. If you're falling asleep and then coming back awake, just back and forth, back and forth. It's really funny to see an airplane. Okay, so this is what N1 looks like. As you can see, the very bottom line of the chin is a little bit thinner. It's not super, like a straight line. The other stages look like that, so N1 is. Now we have N2. N2 is also a late stage of sleep. It is heavily related to memory. This is what N2 looks like. As you can see, the sort of the black lines for the EEG, for the brain, they're a little bit wavier than N1, right? You don't see that? Just N3. This is, or N3/N4, this is labeled as deep sleep, or a version of deep sleep. It really depends on which sleep scientist you ask whether this is deep sleep. But it's also called slow wave sleep. This has a lot of theta and a lot of delta. Deltas are really big, undulating waves. This is what it's going to look like. So you can see the chin line in the very bottom is very thin, very, very thin. And the top two, the eyes, the EOG, that is, the eyes are actually not moving. The eyes, the electrodes on the eyes right here, are actually picking up brain activity, not eye activity. So what are the this? All right. This is not REM. Very exciting, I can tell. So here's REM. Yes, good, REM. They called this REM sleep because like a century ago, someone looked at someone who was sleeping, which is a little creepy, and they saw their eyes moving back and forth. Their eyes are closed. So they call this sleep rapid eye movement because your eyes are moving rapidly back and forth. Also very creative. So there are 2 different types. There is tonic REM, which involves muscle atonia. You know your muscles are really toned, that means they're very active, ready to be moved. Atonia, so a lack of tone, the muscles literally become paralyzed. You cannot move. You don't know why. And we have phasic REM, which has twitches and vocalizations, and this is when the eyes are moving very rapidly. And we don't know why this happens. So, this is also a time when you have your most vivid and intense dreaming. If someone says you can only dream during REM, that's just not true. You can sleep in, so you can dream in any stage of sleep. We have data to prove it, although the most intense vivid is around here. And another thing that was kind of weird is that in males there will be penile erections, and in females there will be vaginal moistening. We also don't know why, although Freud might have some ideas, but he's really dead. So here's REM. So REM has a lot of gamma, beta, alpha, and theta, but mostly theta. Okay. This is what REM looks like. As you can see, I don't think I can tell from all the way back there, but the bottom line, the EMG line, the chin line, is very flat, but there's still some little blips. Those are twitches. And you can see on the very top, the top two, you can see a little, like, the line's very straight, and then they go inward, and that's actually rapid eye movements. Okay, next, Okay, so this is my cat. Her name is Sushi. I'm going to show you guys an example of what phasic REM sleep will look like. You can actually see this in your own pet. So it's very brief video. So she's in REM sleep. Just notice irregular breathing, notice twitching. Now it's fun, right? So this is pretty, you can see twitching. So what's really weird is that it wasn't until like 1991 did sleep scientists think to put electroencephalography on a sleeping person. And they saw that the brain coming up quieter, right? The waves going low, right? And then the brain lit up again for some reason. The person looked like they were awake, but they were very obviously asleep. And so if you can see here, rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep, has the same exact brain activity as an awake person for some reason. So it's often argued to not even be sleep, but argued to be sleep, which creates a really big dilemma. And we don't know why this is. All right, that's nice. Any questions about that? Okay, let's play a game. This is the sleep or awake game. I'm going to show you guys actual EEG data of one of my own participants. And your guys' job, to raise their hands, is to identify whether they are awake or asleep. This is designed to be difficult. It takes about a month, like about 40 hours of work for an undergraduate student to become proficient in this. So if we don't all get it, that's okay. This is what we call it. All right, first one, with a show of hands, is this person asleep? Wrong answer. No one thinks this person is asleep. All right, what about awake? Show of hands. Person awake? Okay. You're going to get more and more answers for awake. This person is asleep. This person is in slow wave sleep. You can see the really big undulating waves. All right, next one. You guys ready for the next one? All right, here's the next one. All right, hands for sleep.
They're all asleep.
Okay. Put your hands down. All right. Now, hands for awake. A little bit more for awake. All right, this person is awake. This person is in diet sleep.
2 for 2.
2 for 2. Unfortunately, we don't have any cash cards. I'm sorry. Next one. All right, hands for sleep. All right, hands down. All right, hands for awake. Some people think this person is asleep. This person is asleep.
Yes, sir. 3 for 3. Let's go. 3 for 3.
This person is in N2 sleep.
Good job, Mom. I love you. I love you. The wrong baby.
All right. Here's the next one. We have one more after this. Hands for asleep. Low confidence. Okay, hands down. All right, hands for, what am I thinking for? Hands for awake. There we go, low confidence. This person is awake.
Yes.
Yes. The biggest giveaway is the chin. A lot of chin. Alright guys, this is the last one for the sleep or wake game. This is the top one. I made it to the top on purpose. Not my So the first one, this is first hands for sleep. Is the person asleep?
Oh, baby, this person is asleep.
Okay. Alright, hands down. Alright, hands for awake. Okay. This person is asleep.
Yes, sir.
I would have also taken microwave. Okay, alright, next one. Alright, so our segue, so from the what is to the why we sleep. Throughout this presentation, I'm hoping to sort of bust the myths. You're going to hear, get your 8 hours in. That's not really wrong. The average amount of sleep someone needs to get, you guys are teens, so 14 to 15 years old, right? 14, yeah, 14, the average is 8. Actually, for you guys, the average is 9. But the range is quite large. So the range is from 7 to 11 hours in Western society. So the range is quite large. I, for example, need like 10 hours of sleep to be able to function like a normal person. I get 7, I'm screwed. So for you guys need a little bit more than I do. And female sleep changes first with age. And that's because females' biology changes earlier or sooner than males, which begs the question, is this a psychological thing, or is it heavily related to our biology? And this continues to change as we get older. As we get older, the average amount of sleep that someone would get is much lower. It's going to be closer to like 6 or 7 hours. And the range is still pretty large. Some older adults by around 60 years of age might need like anywhere from 5 to like 8 hours of sleep. And what's really weird is that some older adults don't even get slow wave sleep. There's no change in REM sleep, which is strange. They get 0 deep sleep. We don't know why. Because they function just as well, relatively speaking. They still function just fine, but they lack deep sleep. Which kind of confuses us, because that means what is the actual function of slow wave sleep? That someone cannot get it and function just fine. Or they may not function just fine, the memory might get worse, right? I guess that's my job to find that out. So the next thing, make sure to get your REM cycle in. That's not wrong. Generally, you're going to have more non-REM sleep in the first half of the night and more REM sleep in the second half of the night. And if this is true, and if you guys can see this little graph here, this is quite general. As you go from wake to N1 to N2, slow wave sleep, and then straight back up, and you're going to go into REM, and then the cycle continues. That's not always the case. You can go from N1, N2, then slow wave sleep, wake up, go back into N2 immediately, go back into slow wave sleep, and then go into REM. Or you might go from fall asleep in the morning, fall asleep at night, go into N2 immediately, go into REM immediately, skip slow wave sleep for like 4 hours, and at the end of the night, then you get your slow wave sleep. It's quite general, and it really changes with age, it changes per person, it changes per night. There's a lot of factors involved in this, especially with age. As we get older, some people just totally lack slow wave sleep for some reason, but there's not a whole lot of change in the amount of REM sleep. And not that many research studies have found any changes within, like, what about REM sleep changes, if not the amount, and maybe about the quality of what I'm doing. And in older adults, their REM sleep can occur like equally as often in the first half of the night compared to the second half, which also raises the question of, is the time of when REM sleep occurs, is that important? And maybe if I come back next year, I can give you guys an answer about that. But for now, skip that. Okay. Why is sleep important? I actually want to hear. I wasn't planning on getting questions from you guys about why is sleep important, but I want to hear. What do you guys think? Why is sleep important? Yes.
It helps your brain rest.
I can't hear you.
It helps your brain rest.
Yes. Any other brave souls? Yes. I like her. I like her. Yes, what's up? If you don't sleep, your brain will start eating itself. You're not wrong. Muscles do that, but they don't rest. Yes, I guess it can. I guess in a way it does. Yeah. Okay. So why is sleep important? So this is from a very famous study done in 2002. This is all math. In the x-axis we have hours of sleep. The average is 7. So if you get more hours of sleep or less hours of sleep than you actually need, then the hazard ratio is the chance of something bad happening, essentially mortality. This study showed using statistics that getting more hours of sleep than you need or less hours of sleep you need, statistically, the sheer chances of dying goes up. You know, that was really strange. This is just from math. The next one is the same exact thing for hypertension or developing high blood pressure. This can happen at any time in your life. And the same exact thing for developing type 2 diabetes. If you memorize syllables, like you just memorize some stuff, and then go to sleep right afterwards, you're going to remember more of it and for much longer had you stayed awake after learning just memorizing some syllables. So it affects memory. Sleep does a lot of stuff. It affects absolutely everything we do. It affects our general health. It affects, if we get a lack of sleep or too much of it, we're more prone to illness. We may have metabolic issues, we have appetite issues, we have extreme weight gain and weight loss. And physical performance, example like sports, gets worse. We might have hormonal rhythm problems, a response to vaccinations get worse. Our general survival gets worse, self-harm is more likely to occur. You might have learning and memory issues. You might have problems with attention, with mood, psychological well-being. Your anxiety can get worse, which makes sleep worse, which makes your anxiety get worse, sleep worse. You might get more depressed, which makes your sleep worse, which makes your depression worse. It's a bad cycle. You might have motivation problems, self-awareness problems. Your judgment gets worse, your ability to think gets worse, your reaction time gets worse, sociability, substance use will increase, and so do car accidents. Sleep affects everything we do. Sleep is so important. One of my favorite things I like to hear is, I can sleep when I'm dead. I'll sleep when I'm dead. Like, oh, let's go out tonight. Let's go out late. I'll sleep when I'm dead. Sleep when I'm dead. A very famous study, that's another very famous study. Studies that were done in the 70s found that when you sleep-deprived animals, specifically monks and other wolves, they found that after totally sleep-depriving them, they all died. I'm not sure why. Then they did it again, but they gave one group of animals food so they could eat, but they weren't allowed to sleep. And they gave another group of animals no food, but they were allowed to sleep. And the animals that were not allowed to sleep died first, before the animals that got no food. Does that mean also? Does that mean the sleep is more important than eating? Maybe. These studies are illegal. Like, they became illegal in the 80s, obviously, because you can't purposely kill an animal. So essentially, this one recent study said that the ultimate outcome of prolonged sleep deprivation is that you will die from a lack of sleep. Some poor graduate students had to take shifts to literally poke the mice for days. And that was their research project. Yes, in fact.
During your
Yes.
watch the little thingy move?
Yeah, so I think your question was, if I'm going to do my study, does someone need to stay awake, right? Does someone else need to stay awake?
Do you just like stare at the little screen and,
Yes. Yes, lots of fun.
okay.
I mean, it doesn't require a whole lot of mental effort to pay attention to that. One time when I was doing a study, I actually watched Shrek 1 and 2 while I was doing laundry. It was, yeah. So it doesn't require too much attention. All right. How do we find out the what and the why of sleep? So essentially, how do we figure out that? What do we do to learn more about sleep? We can do a neuropsychological evaluation. We can literally just ask people, how do you sleep? Do you have insomnia? Do you have sleep apnea? Do you wake up feeling tired? We can do self-report questionnaires. We can have people fill out questions, just literally ask them, how do you sleep? This is a subjective measure, meaning this is up to the subject, this is their opinion, this is their bias, this is what they think. This isn't something measured. Or as a counterpart, you can do objective measurements, which is unbiased, typically measured very quantitatively, quantity less so about quality. So the one thing we can do is just observe. For example, we can observe a cat, like when she's sleeping, what's her posture? Where is she sleeping? That's an observation. Another thing we can do is polysomnography, or electrosomnography, which is the gold standard of sleep measurements. And this literally takes electrical waves from the brain, measures them, puts them into a computer, which processes them and turns them into those lines that I showed you earlier. This is a quantitative, a quantity of brain activity or a measure of brain activity. So subjective and objective. Does that make sense to you guys? This is, if you guys ever go into science, it's like this is going to be one of the first lessons you'll ever learn. Okay. Angel's question. Do jellyfish sleep?
Yeah.
What do you guys think? I actually want to hear. What do you guys think?
Yes.
No.
Absolutely.
Okay.
No.
All right.
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Let's find out. This is a jellyfish. It is supposed to be upside down. It is naturally upside down because it's weird to be jellyfish. So in this study that came out in 2017, 5 years ago, some scientists tried to figure this out. So here are our definitions. The very first thing, typical posture. Jellyfish don't have spines, so they don't have posture. A location, they're just out there in the ocean, so they don't really have a location. Behavioral quiescence. They do have a dampening of behavior sometimes. Jellyfish do move, right? Like this jellyfish, right? This is upside down, so I don't know how it is. So it does have behavioral quiescence. And this behavioral quiescence, like I said, remember like poking your friend on the shoulder to get their attention? When poked during the behavioral quiescence was rapidly and spontaneously reversible. When poked during the behavioral quiescence for this rapid and spontaneous reversibility, this jellyfish required more pokes to get their attention for them to begin moving again. So there was more pokes were needed to get the jellyfish's attention for it to move again. Literally, like I said, for the mice studies, if someone literally needed to go into the ocean, find this jellyfish, spend shifts literally poking the jellyfish. This is someone's 2 years of research on one thing, so that's not lucky. This behavioral quiescence did follow a 24-hour clock, so it did exhibit a circadian rhythm. And when poked often, so they got a lack of behavioral quiescence, afterwards there was a rebound of it, so there was more, so it was homeostatically regulated. So, do jellyfish sleep? Probably.
Yes.
But the point is, sleep is universal. Literally, virtually every single animal on the planet sleeps. We don't know why. It just happens. And literally every single one of them. The only things that don't really sleep are bacteria. So it's lucky for them. Even plants, there's some evidence that plants also sleep. But they don't really have nervous systems, so if they do sleep, they don't sleep like we do. Yeah, good enough time. All right. Last thing for the sleep section. Can we sleep whenever and however much we want? Maybe. Well, the answer is no. There we go. No, we can't. Sorry. No, because sleep has rules. So the first rule is circadian rhythms. And I'm just going to go over this. So circadian rhythm is an event that occurs at a regular, predictable interval. The most famous rhythm for us is the sleep and wake. We are awake during the sunlight interval, or I guess during this auditorium light interval. So something has to tell our brain when the interval is, because literally every single cell in your body has a 24-hour clock. And this biochemical clock is a chemical reaction that takes 12 hours to start and 12 hours to finish. The only cell in your body that does not do this are red blood cells. They lack DNA to make the proteins to start this clock. So this is ingrained, literally ingrained in our DNA. So how are these clocks in sync with each other? They're all running. Something has to tell them what time it is. How do they do that? The answer is a master clock. The master clock has to tell them to do this. And this master clock is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. I'm not going to go into details of where that is in the brain because that will take too long. So I'm just going to call it the master clock. So the internal clock, how's it work? Our eyes detect light. I think you guys know that one already. Our eyes detect light and they tell our master clock, hey, the sun is up, be awake. So the master clock is like, all right, cool. Let me go tell the parts of the brain that keep us awake to turn on, the parts of the brain that keep us asleep, to fall asleep, to turn off. Which means that we are alert, hungry, and active. And by being hungry is an awake thing, because you can only really eat while you're awake. So if it's nighttime, there is no light going to your eyes. You're running clean. So your eyes do not tell your master clock that there's light. Your master clock is already, all right, cool. Let me go turn off the wake promoting brain parts, and let me go turn on the sleep promoting brain parts. So you become drowsy, tired, less active, your cognition is lower. But if you're like me, and I'm not supposed to do this, I know, I'm sure all of you have done this at night. You get out your phone in bed, right? Okay, that means all of you have done it. So when this happens, your eyes were just telling your brain that it was nighttime. But now, there's light all of a sudden, and your eyes tell your brain that there is light for some reason. Your master clock is really confused, and that doesn't really know what to do. Do I turn the wake promoting stuff on? Do I turn the sleep promoting stuff off? Like which one do I turn on? Which one do I turn off? So you can become drowsy, you can become awake at night. This can cause insomnia. You essentially become tired while awake, but alert while asleep. Which you guys are all in that state, right?
So if someone who is like completely blind has a zero light conception,
Yes, this is a good question. So I'm giving my educated guess on this was covered. Essentially, the part of the eye that goes directly, the part of the eye that tells the master clock that there's light is this different part of your brain than the one that goes to where eye information is being processed. It bypasses it, and it goes under conscious perception. Someone is blind, and they typically will lack some ability to pick up photons. You have to draw the cones, right, in the eyes. Not yet. Okay, pressing your eyes to pick up light, which are photons. Someone is blind. Even if they're not totally blind, something will be there to pick up some sort of light. Otherwise, they'll have food, which helps them. Calories, while you're awake, you need calories, which I'll talk about after the circadian rhythm part. So that can help. It's a good question. Research is ongoing, so that's a good question. I'll get to you in a second. There's a hand is way back. What's up? You got an ADL, sorry.
Is it possible to break into a meeting and get into a habit of a bad schedule?
Oh, it is very, very possible. I think every single person in this room has an imperfect sleep schedule because we're constantly surrounded by light during that time. And also looking at our phones all the time. That's a good question. Yes, you have something? Animals, ooh, that's a good question. Yes, hibernation. So like if an animal, let's take like a bear. because we all know what bear is, right? So if you take a bear that's hibernating, the brain activity, if the metabolism slows down, you gotta go enter into a state called cortex. And the metabolism is incredibly low, the brain will look like they're in slow. And M2. And it's actually quite weird. Torpor is something we're currently researching. We don't have too much about your question. Alright, this song is one, the purple hat gonna go second. I'm gonna go one behind you. Yeah.
Do you think if we like eliminated phones, like before we go
Oh,
to
sorry,
bed?
can you speak up?
Do you think if we got rid of phones like completely before we went to bed, do you think our sleep would like significantly improve?
I would imagine yes. That would help. It wouldn't be a magic fix, and I'll talk about that on the thing coming up after this. Yes, I'll talk about it. Yes, that will significantly help. Yeah. All right, couple hats.
Okay, so if we were blindfolded and then like stood in front of like a big bright lamp before we went to sleep, so the rest of our cells still got light but not our eyes, would that still keep us awake because light's hitting our cells, or does it have to be our eyes?
That is a good question. That shouldn't really work. There's got to be a pretty damn good blindfold to block out all of that light. Then it may as well be nighttime, right? Otherwise, the only other animal that can have that work are birds. Because the tops of their skulls are so thin, the light can just bypass the eyes and go straight to the mouth, go straight to the organ in the brain that tells you how to clock to release that attention.
So birds can sleep in light?
Sorry?
Birds can sleep in light?
If they're not nocturnal, yes. If they're nocturnal, then they will, during the night, during the daytime, they will sleep. All right, I got a question. Yes, maroon sweater. I can't hear you. Yes.
Is lucid dreaming beneficial or not?
We don't know. There's a lot we don't know about sleep. Sleep is very new, scientifically very new. The psychology of sleep wasn't really a thing until Freud came around, and that was, 80 years ago-ish. And then the neuroscience of sleep wasn't a thing until 1991, around. So it's about 30 years of neuroscience of sleep, so it's really quite new. Although vivid dreaming is quite interesting. All right, if there are no more questions, we move on to the next one. All right, so okay, so every cell, every tissue, every organ, everything in our body has a time to rest and a time to being awake. If all of our biochemical clocks are not in sync when this happens, when you sleep, that means your rest will be suboptimal. And if they're not all in sync when you're awake, that means your waking performance will not be great. It will also be suboptimal. I'm going to read this word for word because I think it's important. We think of our sleep quality, how we feel while we're awake. If all of these clocks in our body are not in sync, you may feel tired while awake and alert while trying to sleep, even if you slept well the day before. These are internal clocks, really important. So I'm going to talk about this thing called chronotype, which is also vastly important. This is an individual's relative preference for the morning versus the evening. And this changes with age, it changes sooner in females because the biology changes sooner in males. So from adolescence to teens, about 5 years ago, if you guys want to wake up at like 6 or 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. very comfortably, now probably you guys want to wake up at like 10 a.m. or like noon. So there's a change. Your tendency to sleep and wake up is later. And as we get older, like much older, like we're like 60, this goes backwards. Well, more like once you get to like mid-20s, this will go backwards. You're going to wake up earlier and go to sleep earlier. And then as you continuously get older, you want to go to bed at like 7 or 8 a.m. and wake up at like 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. We don't know why this happens. It just does. So our chronotype, this is controlled by our biochemical clocks. This is literally ingrained in our DNA. Well, your DNA. And this is different per person and for different age. But for you guys, one of the reasons why this is so important is because your guys' school day is at around 8 a.m. ends around 3 p.m. Okay, so an optimal school day for you guys is going to start around 10 a.m. and end around 5 p.m. Because your internal clock is much later. What does this mean? There is a mismatch because how you guys are putting two and two together. This is jet lag. So technically, as teenagers waking up at 6 a.m. to get here, you guys are jet lagged, possibly. So you guys might have sleep problems now. You may believe you have sleep problems, something's wrong with your sleep. There might not be anything wrong with your sleep. You might just be jet lagged from school. Yay, for education. Stay in school. All right. Our next rule, homeostasis. This is the balance. Think of homeostasis as balance. This is the maintenance of bodily functions within acceptable and adjustable limits. The longer we are awake, the more likely we are to sleep, or the deeper our sleep may become. And to sort of explain this, I'm going to use an example of ATP. Reagan says yes, thanks Reagan. ATP and caffeine. If you guys don't know what ATP is, it's kale, explain it to you. Yay! Adenosine triphosphate. Raise your hands if you guys know what ATP is. Okay. Alright, thank you. So ATP, adenosine triphosphate. If you guys know, I'm not going to say I'm not sure you guys know what adenine is. It is one of the nitrogenous bases of DNA.
Yeah.
Adenine, when stuck onto a little piece of sugar, it becomes adenosine. And adenosine has 3 phosphate groups. I'm sure you guys know what the chemical phosphorus is. I'm sure people know this. Phosphorus has 3 groups. ATP makes energy, and an awake brain requires a lot of energy. How does ATP make energy? It will chop one of the phosphate groups off to become adenosine diphosphate. It has 2 phosphate groups. And then I can do it again to become adenosine monophosphate to make even more energy. And then again, just become adenosine to produce more energy. And what we're left is just adenosine. Because when we wake up, our brain's like, hey, we're awake, we need energy. Which means it needs to turn ATP into adenosine by the end of the day. Which means the more time we're awake, the more adenosine we have. And adenosine, okay. Anyways, so there are, in your brain, when a chemical is in your brain, it has to do something. It has to lock on to a chemical, or more like a molecule, on a surface of the cell. It's like a lock and key mechanism, where if you have like dopamine, for example, in your brain, dopamine needs to bind what's called a dopamine receptor. And dopamine, then something will happen after that happens. So hopefully that makes sense. Adenosine has an adenosine receptor in the brain. The adenosine will bind the adenosine receptor, and you will feel drowsy and tired, and are more likely to sleep. So when we wake up in the morning, we have a lot of ATP. Adenosine triphosphate becomes diphosphate, becomes adenosine monophosphate, and then it just becomes adenosine. And then we feel tired and go to sleep. You guys know what happens after you have a lot of adenosine at night?
What?
You go to sleep. Oh, I know. Right. So the longer we sleep homeostasis, there's a balance. The longer you're awake, the more likely you are to sleep before you go to sleep. When you go to sleep, this restores energy. Someone says energy restoration. When did you say energy restoration? That was true. Energy is restored by adding phosphate to adenosine. So this is phosphate is added to adenosine, so we have more adenosine triphosphate. If the adenosine gets taken up to become adenosine triphosphate, that means there's less adenosine. If there's less adenosine, that means there's less adenosine to bind the receptor, to make us feel tired, and to make us more likely to fall asleep. So we wake up. And then we have a lot of ATP in the morning, and then the cycle continues. This is what's called a negative feedback loop. This creates a balance. I think I'm forgetting something, but that's fine. So why am I talking about caffeine? I actually have not been talking about caffeine, but I'm about to. Here's the caffeine molecule. Who here drinks coffee? Okay. I thought there was going to be a lot more. Okay. Well, who drinks tea? Yeah. Okay. Alright. You? Alright, so caffeine. Caffeine, let's do a flip. Ready? The caffeine molecule looks shockingly like the adenosine molecule. It looks so much so like the adenosine molecule, it can bind the adenosine receptor. it doesn't look like the adenosine molecule enough to actually do anything, so it does nothing. But, so not only does it do nothing, while the caffeine molecule is there, adenosine can't bind it. So if adenosine doesn't work to make you feel tired and drowsy, it does the opposite. It makes you alert, it makes you awake, it makes you less likely to fall asleep. I just used this example to show you guys what homeostasis is. Adenosine is like one of possibly 200 other chemicals in the brain that sort of regulate you being tired and actually falling asleep. I just prefer the adenosine one, so we talk about caffeine. Because caffeine can stay in your brain the entire day, even when you try to fall asleep at night. Typically, caffeine exits your body after about 8 hours, that is an average. And then if you have caffeine every single day, it can accumulate. I, for example, stopped drinking coffee because it made my insomnia symptoms much worse. So I actually slept better. I felt more awake despite not drinking any coffee. In my sleep lab of 50 people, no one drinks coffee. Wondering why? Alright, okay. So, does that make sense to everyone? Any questions about that? Yes, in that.
So adenosine, is it always like, are the levels always constant in your body? It's just like when the phosphate bonds with it, it doesn't make you drowsy? Is that what it is? Or is it the levels of the adenosine that fluctuate?
It's both. They both fluctuate. Untie my shoe. Okay. Alright, so the last thing here. Certain parts of the brain that get used more during the day show signs of deeper sleep. What does that mean? I'm going to use an example of learning how to write. Yes.
Oh no.
Okay, so imagine you're way back, you're like 6 years old now. Great. And you're learning how to write. And you have to, I'm going to use my right hand as an example because most of you are going to be right-handed. So this part of the brain is going to control the right hand. And because it's going to be used more, it's going to be using more adenosine triphosphate, more than the surrounding areas. So more adenosine is going to accumulate locally on this part of the brain. So when you sleep, since more adenosine is there, that part of the brain is going to sleep more and harder than the rest of it. So that begs the question, is sleep a local thing for the brain? Is it just for some parts of the brain? Is it for the entire brain? Is it for both? Is it for neither? We don't know. There's a lot of things about sleep we don't know. And that is the last thing of the sleep science portion, before I go debunk some myths. Okay. Let's debunk some myths. So the first one, trying to fall asleep. You can't try to fall asleep. Trying to do something is an awake activity. You can only try to do something while you're awake. To fall asleep, if you have trouble falling asleep, you have to allow yourself to fall asleep. It's a very passive thing to do. You have to relax, let yourself drift away. And a lot of Eastern ideologies, which you guys have heard, mindfulness and media or whatever, mindfulness has become very promising in terms of treating sleep disorders. What's the deal with blue light? Who has heard of blue light being a problem in the show camps? Who's like, oh, blue light's terrible, Great, okay. Blue light, the reason why blue light's being talked about is because we found a cell in our eyes that can detect light, but is only sensitive to blue light and blue light only. This cell type is called melanopsin. And what's the next one? Melanopsin, as you can see in this color visible spectrum, if you're colorblind, I apologize. If you see the colors more to the left, that's where the blue light is. The colors all the way to the right is more of the red, orange, yellow light. And the reason why blue is very effective is because in the morning at dawn, there's a lot of blue light being shown. And then when the sun is going down at sunset, there's a lot of orange and yellow light. So in the morning, you want to wake up, right? So at night, you want to not be cold and be awake by the sun. So this directly tells the brain to wake up. However, all light does this too. Less so red light. The further you go to the right, towards the red part of the spectrum, the less effective light is at telling the brain to awake. The further you go to the left, the more effective it is. However, since red light, does this the least, this is the reason why streetlights at night are typically orange. Because we don't want the light to keep people awake. There was one study in Sweden recently where they had UV lights out at night all the time to promote the growth of plants. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. But the locals began to not sleep very well because there's ultraviolet light and other light that's in the blue spectrum all the time. So people weren't sleeping well because their brains are being told to be awake. All right, melatonin. Who here has heard of melatonin? I think everyone's hands will go up. All right, melatonin. Melatonin is typically not necessarily a sleep hormone. Melatonin is an internal clock hormone. It tells the body when nighttime is, and then when the nighttime is over, it goes away. Because since it's a circadian clock hormone that tells all of our cells in our body, or some of them at least, hey, it's nighttime. Does that mean you go to sleep? Yes. Sleeping is a symptom of the circadian clock. That makes sense. Although some people do report like a sedative effect, because some people do actually fall asleep from melatonin. It's like 10 to 20% of people. But I just remembered what I remembered about caffeine. So remember what I was telling you about caffeine? People feel more awake and alert and all that stuff, right? Caffeine, in some people, in about 10%, 15% of people, caffeine will actually work exactly like adenosine. So it makes you fall asleep. And some people. One of my roommates 2 years ago actually chugged a big cup of coffee every night before going to bed. And she fell asleep. She slept like a log. Why does this happen? Don't know. Biology is weird. Dreams. For the show of hands, who here has dreamt? Never. Your hand doesn't go up. No, dreams. So dreams are really weird. Wasn't pre-Freud, dreams are thought of to be this like nonsense stuff that just happens that you remember for some reason. And there's been a lot of spiritual aspects of this, no. But it wasn't until Freud came around and said dreams mean something. Did we begin to think that, well, maybe we should research this, maybe Freud has good ideas. He has some good ideas, most of ideas are not right. But for us to learn more about sleep, we have to put EEG on a sleepy person. Because you can only dream while you're asleep, unless you're daydreaming, which is an entirely different animal itself. We have brain games. Who here has ever done brain games? Like on the downloaded brain game app on your phone? Yeah, I have done it too. They don't work. There was one really famous TV show in Britain where they had contestants do brain games for entertainment, for other people's entertainment, saying that these brain games will help them become smarter or the cognitive strategies will become better. But they found that there is no evidence that the benefits of playing brain training games transfer to other brain skills. If you take a chess grandmaster and shift the board, like turn the board 90 degrees, and then shift the white tiles with black tiles and call them right play, they don't play very well. Because the skills they learned was very specific for playing chess. So some brain games don't typically work. However, some really new brain games are coming out for experimentation, not for fun, that hopefully will come on the market in like 10 or 20 years. I'll let you guys know when that happens. All right, GPA correlates. Who here has a GPA? Yeah. So you guys, I'm sure most of you are going to go to college. So you see here, your GPA, your current term in college. These are Pearson's R correlation, just basic correlation. Your CGPA was the best predictor of 0.55 of your current GPA. Study time was not a very big predictor, it has 0.02. And a value of 0 is neutral, absolutely nothing. If it's positive, that means there's a positive relationship, meaning like the more hours of studying you do, the better your GPA is something. For your HSGPA, your high school GPA, that was half of predictive as your CGPA. Your attendance to class, very important for your GPA. Hopefully all students are attending, right? Yeah, okay. And then we have your study environment. That is more, your study environment is more important than the amount of hours you have spent studying. What does that mean? That means it's better, that means it's better to study in a quiet library for 2 hours compared to a very busy and loud cafe for 4 hours. The quality of your study environment is very important. I'm not saying you should study a lot. I'm just saying you should make sure that your studying is very effective. Work smart and work hard, but making sure working smart is very effective. Hours of working. If you have a part-time job, sorry, that does negatively affect your GPA by a little bit. And the hours of time spent partying, that also negatively affects your GPA. I'm not saying you guys shouldn't have fun. You need to maintain a balance, but make sure you're not partying all the time. All right. Next one, dyslexia, ADHD, language disorders. I won't ask people to raise their hand if they have either any of those disorders. I have 2, FYI. I have 2. A lot of people see learning disorders as a problem of disadvantage. These are now being labeled as what's called desirable disadvantage. Because a lot of people who have ADHD or dyslexia or learning disorder need to develop cognitive strategies to compensate for it. So a lot of people will actually excel because they have developed some sort of mental strategy to help them keep up with everyone else. The CEO of Goldman Sachs, or maybe the former, the founder of Goldman Sachs, if you guys know this really big Wall Street hedge fund managing thing, he is very dyslexic. He was so dyslexic, when he was being read books from his mother as a child, since he couldn't pay attention to keep on what she was saying in the writing, she had to pay attention to what she was saying. And he was so upset that he couldn't follow along that he put in so much effort to be able to pay attention that he developed a cognitive strategy to memorize what everyone is saying just from one go, just from hearing it. And then he took that skill and used it to his advantage, and now he's a big, really rich CEO guy. Very exciting. There was... one minute, all right, this is the last thing. Let's talk about drugs. Yes, drugs, yeah, all right. I'm sure all of you have heard of Ritalin and Adderall and Xanax and caffeine before. So, there was one study where they sleep-deprived people and they gave them either placebo, they gave them caffeine, they gave them amphetamines. Ritalin and Adderall are amphetamines, and modafinil, essentially. Caffeine worked just as well as Ritalin and Adderall to keep someone alert and awake and vigilant. What does that mean about how useful it is to people who do not have learning disorders? If you do have ADHD, then Ritalin and Adderall may not actually help you. All right, next thing, last thing. Let's talk about Xanax and Ambien, which all of you have heard about this or result of that. When you take these drugs, they don't necessarily put you to sleep. You should know, here is our Venn diagram. Love Venn diagram, yay. So for our location, they do share the same thing. You're going to take this drug to sedate yourself and become now awake. You're probably going to take it and go to bed. They share that. They do also share a typical posture. However, you're more likely to sleep, if you take this drug, you're more likely to sleep in an uncomfortable position, i.e. sleep plenty. For your behavioral quiescence, you might move even less or at all. Alcohol is also a sedative, and it can do the same thing. I probably sleep with alcohol. You have an elevated awakening threshold that is even higher if you take the drug. And lastly, for homeostasis, it might even go in the other direction. You might take the drug, sleep, and the next morning you might even need more sleep the following day. Or you might not. It really depends. Drugs are weird. So the point is, these drugs often don't necessarily put you to sleep, but put you to not sleep. It depends on the person. All right. Thank you guys very much. I want to thank you.